Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock and welcome wherever you're joining us from this morning, from Iceland to Indonesia. Just one day to go before voting starts in the local elections, and news this morning of the latest squeeze on our pay packet. Shop prices rising at a rapid rate and the cost of chicken on the Prime Minister's mind. So what are the government going to do about it? We'll ask the Environment Secretary George Eustice very shortly, and also the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves in the 8 o'clock hour. Also today, the anger in America over a potential move that would stop women being able to choose to have an abortion. We'll speak to a Republican strategist and a former Democratic member of the Ohio Senate who have very different opinions. It is Wednesday, the 4th of May. Wait for it. May the 4th be with you. A special report from Northern Ireland.
Cost of living crisis deepens as shop prices increase at their highest rate in more than a decade, with a warning there could be worse to come.
Special report from Northern Ireland ahead of elections there that could prove pivotal if Sinn Féin wins. We speak to locals.
And I think the number one factor is the living issue, the electric and the gas.
What they do for my community, they don't do nothing for my community. They only come round the door when they're looking at their phone.
Left in hell as the first convoy of civilians escape Mariupol. Aid workers worry for those left behind as Ukrainian officers claim Russian forces are trying to storm the steel plant.
And as Ukrainian forces continue their fight in eastern Ukraine, there have been new missile strikes in the western city of Lviv.
An assault on our freedom. Strong words from the US Vice President as protests continue over a move to overturn a law legalizing abortion.
If the court overturns Roe v. Wade, it will be a direct assault on freedom.
We reveal the murderers who could have their prison sentence reviewed by senior judges. We're live at court.
He would call the leading actor. He would call the director. He would tell you, I got eyes down there.
The Depp v. Heard libel case. Here's how his controlling behaviour allegedly gave her PTSD as she tries to get the case thrown out. Also coming up on the programme for you this morning, wherever you're watching us around the world, some UK forecasters predicting Ibethan weather here on the horizon later this week. The new research suggesting many of us avoid sunscreen. We'll talk to a young man with incurable skin cancer who wants people to protect themselves better.
Call me back, Cinderella, nasty girl, got a rose.
And I'll speak to two stars of a West End production of Cinderella who only discovered the show had been cancelled after seeing a post on social media. Good morning, everybody. Making ends meet will be at the front of many people's minds, with voting in the local elections due to start tomorrow. Cost of living crisis getting worse again, with news today of a record rise in the price of household goods. Well, Laura is in East London for us this morning, and however you look at it, whatever poll or report you're reading, it's getting worse.
It is. It really is deepening this cost of living crisis, and it isn't going to get any better anytime soon with these latest figures out looking at what we're all paying for items when we go to the shops, when we go to the supermarket. So let's look at these latest figures now. Retail prices, Kay, rose to 2.7% in April. That's up from 2.1% in March, according to the British Retail Consortium. This was the highest annual rate of inflation recorded since September 2011. Food prices also increased. They went up by 3.5% in the year to April. That's up from 3.3% in March. And prices for products other than food went up by 2.2% in the year to April. That's the highest rate since records began back in 2006. So what does it all mean? Well, for consumers, for all of us, when we go to the shops, it's simply going to cost more money. The head of the British Retail Consortium is warning that things are going to get worse before they get better, and that consumers, we should all be braced for a bumpy road ahead.
OK, for now, thanks very much indeed, Laura. Thank you. Should we talk about that in more detail with the Government Minister this morning in the form of the Environment Secretary, George Eustice. Mr Eustice, thanks for joining us on the programme. You're a farmer. What difference have you seen in rising costs?
Well, the big impact on the farming industry has really been the impact on fertiliser costs. And so there's always been a very close correlation between food prices internationally, global agricultural commodity prices, and the price of gas and oil. And that's because there's huge amounts of gas that goes into manufacture fertilisers, and so it has a knock-on impact. So farmers have actually seen the cost of their fertilisers treble, in some cases quadruple. That's a really big increase in their costs. It's also led to increased feed costs, and that's starting to come through the system now as some retail price inflation.
What does that mean for us when we go to the supermarket?
Well, the better news is that we have quite a very, very competitive retail market, with 10 big supermarkets and the 4 main ones competing very aggressively, particularly on some of the, the lower cost everyday value items for households. So things like spaghetti and ambient products, there's a lot of competition to keep those prices down. Where it gets harder is on things like chicken and poultry and some fresh produce, where those increased feed costs do end up getting passed through the system because these people work on wafer-thin margins and they have to pass that cost through.
So what's your advice to people then who want a Sunday roast with a chicken for the family, but they can't afford it?
Well, the thing to bear in mind is that if you look at household spending on food in the UK, it's actually, the lowest in Europe, partly because we've got that very competitive market. It used to be, for the poorest 20% of households, about 16% of their income used to go on food. That dropped a few years ago to about 14%. It's going to rise again now, but generally speaking, what people find is that by going for some of the sort of value brands rather than own branded products, they can actually sort of contain and manage their household budget. But it will undoubtedly put a pressure on household budgets. And of course, it comes on top of those high gas prices as well.
So if it costs less than a fifth of the average household budget, why are people telling us they have to choose between heating and eating?
Well, the reality is that the price of food in and of itself doesn't necessarily cause poverty. But obviously what does is if you've got very sharp rises in people's energy costs, if it costs much more to put petrol in the tank, if they've got housing costs going up, all of this adds to household pressures. And of course, inability to buy food or struggling to afford food is the first thing that people notice because it's something they need on a daily basis and have to buy on a daily or weekly basis. So it's noticed first, and that's why, we recognise that. It's why we've increased the national living wage. It's why we've made some changes to benefits. It's why we've introduced some of those rebates to try and help people with their energy costs, all of which will help people through what is undoubtedly a challenging time.
Isn't it more chicken and egg, to go back to what you were saying a few moments ago, in that people can't afford to put fuel in their vehicle, and if they do have to do that in order to go to work, then they don't have enough money to buy food for the kids at the weekends?
Well, there's a cumulative impact to inflation on household budgets. That? Of course, yes, the government does acknowledge that. Rishi Sunak absolutely acknowledged that in his spring statement. It's why, he made some changes to the planned national insurance so that fewer people on low incomes would be paying that increase. It's why we've got the £150 council tax rebate to give people an immediate relief on their household budgets. It's why there's going to be a further £200 rebate on energy coming later in the year. So there's a package of measures we've put in place. None of it completely mitigates the impact, but all of it's designed to try and help people through a challenging period.
And it's also why a 77-year-old woman, pensioner, has to ride a bus all day to keep warm because she can't afford to heat the house.
Well, look, in addition to all the other things that we're doing, we've also got, we've increased the funding in the household support fund that's given to local authorities. We put an extra...
Her, is it, obviously?
Well, we put
why
an
is she
extra...
riding on a bus?
Exactly. Well,
How would you feel if it was your mother?
Well, in that particular case, and I really would advise the woman in question to seek support from her local authority. They've been given these household support funds specifically to help those who fall between the cracks. So we've increased the national living wage, which helps people that are working. We've changed some of the taper rate on universal credit to help people who are on benefits.
But how would you feel if it was your mother who was riding around on a bus all day because she couldn't afford to stay warm at home?
Well, if it were my mother, then I would support her and go to the local authority and try to get access to that household
It's her family's fault.
Well, no, but what I'm saying is, if you're asking me what my advice to her is, and my advice to her would be to go to the local authority and try to get some support from that household support fund. It's what it's there for. We doubled the fund to £1 billion. It's there to support exactly cases like Elsa's.
When the Prime Minister was asked about this yesterday, he said, oh, yeah, well, I introduced a Freedom Pass, so she won't have to pay for her travel on the bus. He actually didn't introduce a Freedom Pass. Why would he say that?
Well, look, the Prime Minister gave his interview. I'm not aware precisely what he said.
Well, he said that he introduced the Freedom Pass on the buses, and he didn't. Why would he say it?
Well, I don't know. He'll know better than any of us what he might have done when he was London Mayor and some of the measures that he did.
He does tend to misspeak a lot, doesn't he?
Well, I think the point here, if you're coming back to the original question you had, what would my advice be to Elsa? Well, my advice would be, not to stay on a bus all day to try and stay warm. My advice would be to seek some support, from the local authority, and they've got a fund specifically to help cases like that.
Here's a thought. Why don't the government look at a windfall tax, and then they will have an extra, several billion, 2 billion or thereabouts, in fact, even more than that, to play with?
Well, if you're talking about on oil companies, they already pay a higher rate of corporation tax than other companies, around 10% higher corporation tax. If you look at BP, they published good results yesterday, but they will pay around £1 billion in tax on their North Sea oil revenues. Well, they've also announced $18 billion of investment. And what we do need to see from these companies, given that we still have North Sea oil, we need to see them investing in that so that
They said they'll continue to do that. In fact, the chief exec, Bernard Looney, said he would continue to do that even if there was a windfall tax.
Well, all I would say is we've already got a higher rate of tax for those companies in North Sea oil.
Are you saying they pay enough tax?
Well, it's a corporation tax. It's already 10% higher. We judge that that's the right thing at the moment. We don't want to deter investment in the North Sea. They're a big employer. BP, for instance, already
contributes... They're saying it wouldn't deter them, but they would continue to invest even if there was a windfall tax. George Osborne did it, so why will you not do it? Do you feel they pay enough tax? Is that what you're saying?
I'm sure that Rishi Sunak will look at these things and keep all of these things under review. And he was asked about that this week, and he said that's exactly what he will do. But for now, we judge. Yes, it's right that these oil companies pay more, and they already do pay more. The headline rate of income tax or corporation tax is already 10% higher. Overall, with all the other levies and taxes that are in place, they pay double the tax that most companies would pay. If at some point there's a case for reviewing that, well, obviously, Rishi has got a budget coming up in the autumn, another statement coming after that. He obviously keeps the entire tax regime under review all the time.
Do you feel that BP pays enough tax as of today?
Well, as of today, I understand it's going to pay about £1 billion in tax. Well, oil companies, if you're asking me, oil companies overall are paying twice as much tax on their revenues.
My question is, do you think they pay enough tax?
Well, for now, yes, and that's why we've chosen not to do it, because they already pay a higher tax.
OK. Even though they say that if there was a windfall tax, they would continue to invest in the same, what the projected investment would be, they would continue with that in the United Kingdom, in the North Sea, oil fields, etc. And we have seen previous governments do it, previous Conservative governments, including George Osborne, and even going back to the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher introduced a windfall tax when she felt that banks were making too much profit on interest rates. It seems like a slam dunk.
Well, all I'd say, I'll come back to what I said. They pay higher tax already, a higher headline rate of corporation tax. BP will pay £1 billion in tax on those North Sea revenues. You say that they would like to be taxed more.
I didn't say
mean, of
that.
course,
I didn't say that.
Well, they would be willing to pay more tax, and
That's
it wouldn't
what I said.
affect their investment decisions. But Rishi Sunak, when he makes these decisions, has got to be thinking about the sector as a whole. What one company might say may not apply to others. And what we do need is to see these companies investing in the North Sea so that we don't become dependent on other countries for our oil and gas. It's important we've got that. Gas and oil is going to play an important role during our transition to net zero, particularly with the importance of hydrogen power and things like that. So we have to be able to have that investment during this period.
But we've underlying profits for BP more than doubled to $6.2 billion in the first 3 months of this year. I'll say those figures again. More than doubled to $6.2 billion in the first 3 months of this year. And yet, in 21st century Britain, we've got pensioners riding around on a bus to keep warm.
Well, my understanding is that is a global profit figure. And if you look at the North Sea figure, it is lower than that. But they are going to pay £1 billion in corporation tax on that North Sea. Yes, and our view, and the view that Rishi Sunak's taking at the moment is they're already paying more tax. Increasing that tax rate might deter investment. And also, introducing a windfall tax may not actually raise a huge amount of extra money. And these are always difficult judgments.
Why then, if that's the case, why did George Osborne think it was a good idea, and why did even Margaret Thatcher think it was a good idea?
Well, it was a different era and a different time. And we actually do have higher rates of tax on oil companies at the moment.
Sounds like you've ruled it out.
Well, nothing's ever obviously ruled out. The tax system's kept under constant review. We have two, key fiscal events a year: the autumn budget and the statement.
Let's talk about the local elections. Are you worried about Sinn Féin being on the brink of victory in Northern Ireland?
Well, look, these are democratic elections. We've got a very clear approach in Northern Ireland under the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, where you have power sharing. So whoever the largest party will be, there must be a power sharing executive. That's how things are established in Northern Ireland. And obviously what we want to do, and it's for the people of Northern Ireland to decide who their representatives are, what the makeup of that is. But it's very important that whatever's decided respects both communities. That's always been the case. It's an absolutely critical component of the Good Friday Agreement. And we're really committed to trying to make that Northern Ireland Protocol work better, to improve the way that's interpreted, to get an agreement with the European Union to ensure that the goods can flow, and that some of the rather ludicrous things that we see, like them banning the sale of seed potatoes and so forth, which makes no sense at all, that we can actually remove that.
OK, I suppose I'm taking you back to the fact that if Sinn Féin win the local elections in Northern Ireland, they want a border referendum. If there's a border referendum, then it is likely that we will see an island of Ireland united, which would mean that this Prime Minister potentially was the Prime Minister in charge of overseeing the split up of the Union. And then who knows what might happen in Scotland.
Well, look, let's take one thing at a time. I think from the reports that I've seen in all that, and you can't tell, let's wait and see, first of all, what happens on Thursday. But I think it's also the case that quite a lot of people are trying to...
But you acknowledge that's a possibility.
Well, it's a possibility, obviously, that Sinn Féin will be... It's a democratic election.
And then we'll see a border referendum.
And then you don't know what would happen
well, they want a border
referendum,
don't they? So you'd be heading down in that direction.
A lot of
if we
the
saw
people,
a border referendum, what might happen, do you think?
Well, a lot of the people, I think, in the Northern Ireland election this time, are not, voting for once through the prism of either, being nationalist or unionist.
I understand that, but
what
would this government think about a border referendum?
Well, look, we will deal with whatever we're faced with after we have the results on Thursday.
So what is the government position on the reunification of Ireland?
Well, Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. We're
but
committed
if
to
democratically they choose to be part of, after a border referendum, they then decide to be part of a united Ireland, then what's the position? Because you said it would be a democratic election.
Well, of course we believe in democratic elections. But whether or not...
it's not such a far-fetched from what I'm suggesting.
Whether or not to have a referendum is always a matter for the UK government, always has been, for instance,
so you would
in the
stop
case
it?
of Scotland. we haven't got into that. We will wait and see what happens when we have that election on Thursday. As I said, many people in many communities in Northern Ireland are not
So it's
voting.
democratic till it's not?
They're not voting this way necessarily on the basis of whether people are nationalist or whether they're unionists. Sometimes they're voting for a local candidate. You can't read too much into that election result based on the parties that are there. And whichever party comes out as the largest party, you know, the power-sharing executive will carry on as it has done previously.
Fascinating debate. Unfortunately, we're out of time, so I'm going to have to let you go. I'm actually going to Ireland on Friday to chat on the Late Late Show, and I know they'll ask me about this, which is why I was pressing you this morning. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Let's have a look what the papers are doing this morning. And The Guardian quotes President Joe Biden insisting that the leaked decision from the US Supreme Court, which looks set to overturn women's nationwide access to abortion, imperils civil rights. BP's first quarter earnings, just talking about that, weren't we? $6 billion are prompting fresh calls for a windfall tax to be imposed on the oil giant with the aim of helping the public pay their energy bills. That's according to the FT. Mirror questions whether the PM will step in on the rising cost of living, saying the situation was beyond pathetic. But the Express has exclusive comments from the PM, who pledges to fire up the economy to beat the cost of living crisis. The Eye says the government's plan to send migrants to Rwanda is in chaos after Number 10 was forced to admit no deportations will take place for months, despite a target for the end of May. The man who can't answer a straight question, who are we talking about? Well, in this instance, the Daily Mail, again taking aim at Keir Starmer over Beergate. And a reminder that just under a fortnight we'll be taking the show on the road for a special series of programmes. I'll be going back to my roots and finding out how the good people of Wigan feel about the cost of living crisis. Do let me know if you'd like to get involved by sending me a tweet. And that's going to be here on Sky News at the usual time from the 16th of May. Still to come on the programme for you this morning. With the US Supreme Court reportedly set to overturn an historic law that legalised abortion, I'll be speaking to a former Republican state chairman and a former Democrat Senate member about what is next for women's abortion rights. Then I'll be speaking to the author of a new book that hopes to bring gender equality to the workplace. And in the next hour, as campaigning for local elections enters the final day, joined by the Labour Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves. Russian forces have stepped up their assaults on the Azovstal steel plant in Ukraine's besieged city of Mariupol, where 200 civilians remain trapped, including children. President Zelensky says 156 civilians have managed to escape from the bunkers and have finally reached the city of Zaporizhzhia. In Mariupol, civilians have been trapped in tunnels beneath the steel plant, with the last remaining Ukrainian forces surviving in horrendous conditions. Following tense negotiations, evacuations finally began on Saturday when a convoy of buses and ambulances began a rescue mission. 156 people put on buses and taken to the relative safety of the Russian-controlled village of Bezymen and the city of Zaporizhzhia. But anyone still in Mariupol can't now get out without another ceasefire. Alex is in Dnipro for us this morning, and those people that are still trapped in Mariupol, surviving in horrendous conditions, I believe. Alex, good morning.
The conditions inside the Azovstal plant are, as you say, absolutely horrendous, and they are getting worse all the time. The humanitarian situation is extremely dire. We have seen this being played out, really, almost in slow motion. We've seen things posted on social media over the last few weeks. We've seen fighters inside who've lost limbs, others who have wounds that are starting to rot. They are gangrenous because they can't get the medicine and medical treatment that they need. And of course, inside with them are, we think, about 200 civilians. What happens to those people, we simply don't know at the moment. They are trying to negotiate another ceasefire. The diplomacy on that front is faltering. We have seen, after the last evacuees managed to escape, the Russians have resumed very heavy shelling and aerial bombardment of that plant. Satellite images, incidentally, show the extent of the devastation and damage. Whole areas of that complex have literally been obliterated by the very heavy bombing. Now, I was in Zaporizhia yesterday and I spoke to a number of people who'd managed to escape, and they described the trauma of what it was like to be inside. Many of them were getting off the buses after they arrived in the relative safety of the UN reception point, which had been set up in a shopping centre. They were confused in some cases. Others didn't really know what to make of all the waiting press. They didn't really quite understand how much their story had captured the world's attention, but every single one of them absolutely relieved to be out of there. They told me that they could put up, in some cases, it's hard to believe, with the shelling, but it was the big bunker busters that really brought the horror home, because the walls shaked in some parts, the bits that they were in started to fall down. But the concern now, of course, is for those people still trapped inside, and we just do not know at this moment whether the diplomacy will be able to reach another agreement for them to get out.
OK. Alex, for now, thank you. Thanks a lot. Well, in other developments in Ukraine, explosions were reported in the western city of Lviv overnight. The city's mayor said that 3 electricity substations were damaged by a missile strike. He urged people to stay in bomb shelters. Ukraine says that more than 20 people have been killed in an attack on the Donetsk region. The region's governor says another 30 people were also injured after Russian troops shelled a chemical plant in Advika. Protests have been taking place in cities right across America after a leaked ruling from the Supreme Court suggested that abortion rights could be overturned. The draft is not a final ruling, but if it is confirmed, up to half of US states could ban abortion. The ruling has been widely criticised, and a new poll has found nearly 2/3 of Americans are more likely to back candidates in the November midterm elections who support the right to abortion.
Women's rights in America are under attack. If the court overturns Roe v. Wade, it will be a direct assault on freedom.
And join us a little later on in this hour when we'll be delving quite a lot deeper, actually, into the debate around US abortion law with the Republican strategist, Amy Tarkanian, and the former Democratic member of the Ohio Senate, that's Capri Cafaro. Some of Britain's most high-profile killers are to have their sentences reviewed. 5 convicted murderers are having their cases looked at. Among them are Wayne Couzens, who received a whole life order for the abduction and murder of Sarah Everard. The killers of 6-year-old Arthur Labinio Hughes will have the appeals of their sentences examined as well as Ian Stewart, who was convicted of the murder of his wife in 2010 and his new fiancée 6 years later. And judges will consider whether the sentence for Jordan Monaghan, who murdered his partner and 2 children, was too lenient. And looking at some other headlines for you this morning now, Prince William has called for more action to prevent male suicide and says society is not tackling the issue as fast as we need to. The Duke of Cambridge made the remarks during his visit to a new help centre in London. He said men can sometimes forget about the bigger picture, but having support can help them move forward. Elon Musk has said that businesses and governments may soon need to pay a slight fee to use Twitter. He maintained the site would remain free for casual users and has previously said he would introduce new premium features such as an undo tweet button, bookmarks and a reader mode. The United States Embassy in Cuba has started issuing visas for the first time in more than 4 years. Washington closed its consular services in the Cuban capital in 2017 after US personnel and their families suffered from mystery illnesses, subsequently known as Havana syndrome. South Korean and Japanese officials have said North Korea has launched a suspected ballistic missile towards its east coast. Our Asia correspondent Tom Cheshire is standing by for us in Beijing this morning. Hi, Tom. A very good morning. Not now, North Korea. What's going on?
Morning, Kay. I mean, this is part of a concerted campaign of pressure that's been building up all through this year recently, really. This is the 10th test this year. Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea, has vowed to build his country's nuclear capability at the fastest pace possible. He's certainly keeping true to his word with this latest test. In terms of this missile, it's probably not massively concerning in and of itself, beyond the capability it is demonstrating. It looks like from its trajectory, it reached about 800 kilometers high. In the air traveled around 500 kilometers, that it might be a medium-range ballistic missile, so not the intercontinental ballistic missiles we've seen them test already this year, which have a much further range, which could, in theory, strike the US mainland, which has always been a worry for the White House. The question is, why is he keeping up with this campaign? I think a large part of that is to do with the new president who will be sworn in South Korea, Yoon Suk-yeol. He's taken a hard line in his leadership campaign. He's vowed to increase military spending. We've also seen similar things from Japan in terms of they're looking around, looking at China, looking at North Korea, wanting to increase their own military spending. So this is probably North Korea reminding them of their capability, especially as President Biden is due to visit South Korea and Japan next week. This is North Korea rattling its saber again, saying we still don't have a deal and we're still a nuclear power.
OK, for now, thank you. The rocket has been caught mid-air by a helicopter. OK. Find out what happens. Here we go. How can it have been caught? Oh, I see. Oh, I see. I get it. Rocket Lab's helicopter crew attempted to grab hold of the parachute lines with dangling a cable and a hook. This was part of the company's cost-saving approach to recover used rockets, so they would not have to rebuild them from scratch. The helicopter caught the falling rocket before being forced to drop it for safety reasons about 20 seconds later. I thought it meant that the helicopter had caught the images of the rocket, and it was like, OK, it happens all the time. But I see now what they meant. Now, Amber Heard is expected to take the stand on the 14th day of Johnny Depp's defamation trial against her. The actor is suing his ex-wife for $50 million over a domestic abuse article she wrote in the Washington Post. Meanwhile, she's counter-suing for $100 million. Here's Katie Spencer.
The witnesses for Johnny Depp finished. In court, Amber Heard's team hit back, calling on the judge to dismiss the case altogether.
Mr. Depp hasn't introduced any evidence, and there can't be a reasonable inference drawn that would permit a jury to find that he's proven by clear and convincing evidence that Ms. Heard wrote the words.
Their grounds, how Depp's team had shown that the Washington Post article, including its controversial headline, wasn't written by Heard.
The only evidence that has been presented in this case, Your Honor, by Mr. Doherty was that the op-ed wasn't Ms. Heard's idea, that the ACLU asked her to write the op-ed, and indeed that they even wrote the first draft, and then that Ms. Heard vetted the finished article with her lawyers and with lawyers from the ACLU to make sure that it wasn't problematic. That is the only evidence in the record.
Depp's legal team's response.
This was just a scam for her to get the $7 million in the divorce settlement that she said she gave to the ACLU. She swore she gave to the ACLU and the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, and she pocketed.
With the judge dismissing 2 of the motions but promising to take advice on a third, Heard's team brought their first witness, an expert on intimate partner violence whose psychological evaluation concluded Heard had PTSD from Depp's controlling behaviour.
No matter what show she was filming or shooting, he would call the leading actor. He would call the director. He would tell you, I got eyes down there. I got eyes down on the set. So she never felt safe to be herself and be an actress.
The couple's marriage described as a damaged relationship, punctuated by coercive control, as this defamation case continues. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Fascinating stuff, isn't it? What about the weather? Is that? Let's see.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Britain will see showers developing widely today after a dull, wet start for many, but it'll turn mostly fine later on. Mild but cloudy, with outbreaks of rain over northwest central and southeast Britain, and fog on the hills.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Lily's put some pictures together again for us this morning. This is what they look like. The Telegraph. Love this story. Christopher Hope, who we know, of course, on this programme, who is the deputy editor of, assistant editor, I should say, of The Telegraph. This is his good lady. That's Sarah Hope, the wife, as I said, of the paper's assistant editor. She was awarded an MBE from Prince Charles at Windsor Castle yesterday after setting up a charity to help improve the lives of child amputees across the world. Do you remember? You'll remember the story. The charity launched after losing her mum in a bus crash in 2007 and the accident which also left her 2-year-old daughter, Pollyanna, needing to have a right leg amputated. Thanks to prosthetics, Pollyanna is now an accomplished ballet dancer. And we've seen images of her, of course, on the show previously. Congratulations. You might want to check your cupboards after this vase that stood in a British surgeon's kitchen for 40 years could fetch up to £150,000 at auction. It was purchased in the 80s for a few £100s. Little did the buyer know it's actually a rare 18th century Chinese artefact. They'll be saying that about Kay Burley at breakfast mugs in future. And fancy fish for... I don't know why you're laughing. And fancy fish for breakfast. Well, this huge bald eagle certainly did. This remarkable picture was taken by bird photographer Mark Costa, and that was in Scottsdale in Arizona, moments after the raptor swooped this catfish. The bald eagle is America's national symbol, and locals have fondly named this one Bandit. So in the last half an hour, the Environment Secretary has told this programme, George Eustice, of course, about what he thinks might happen in the local elections, more widely, but also specifically in Northern Ireland. How concerned are they if Sinn Féin wins that election, that there could be a border referendum to potentially unite the island of Ireland? This is what he had to say.
Whether or not to have a referendum is always a matter for the UK government, always has been, for instance,
so you would
in the
stop
case
it?
of Scotland. We haven't got into that. We will wait and see what happens when we have that election on Thursday. As I said, many people in many communities in Northern Ireland are not
So it's
voting.
democratic till it's not?
They're not voting this way necessarily on the basis of whether people are nationalist or whether they're unionists. Sometimes they're voting for a local candidate. You can't read too much into that election result based on the parties that are there.
Oh, Tamara, thoughts?
Yes, a cabinet minister saying that a border poll in Northern Ireland is a possibility. I mean, of course, that is just a fact because, you know, only the Northern Ireland secretary can call that border poll if there is a majority in Northern Ireland in favour of it. And of course, you'd have to have a referendum in Northern Ireland and in the Republic of Ireland. So we're a long way down the track, but could the first move happen this week if, as polls suggest, Sinn Féin win the most seats in the local elections in Northern Ireland on Thursday? We'll find out those results Friday night into Saturday. George Eustice says we'll deal with whatever we are faced with at that point, and it will be a huge task that they are faced with because the expectation is that the Unionists would decline to serve in a power-sharing administration with Sinn Féin if they had the First Minister. Therefore, you'd have turmoil potentially for months afterwards and, of course, huge pressure to renegotiate the Brexit agreements, this infamous protocol that Boris Johnson signed up to and is proving very unpopular with unionists. So that could be the most consequential of the local elections that we have this week.
And with Tamara's take in the 9 o'clock hour, I want to ask you about the fact that he says that he feels that the oil companies are paying enough tax for now. But we'll come back to that at 9 o'clock. We'll come back to that. If that's OK. Meantime, what do the people of Northern Ireland think ahead of the local elections tomorrow? Who better to find out than our very own David Blevins?
For some, there's only one election issue, the Brexit border separating them from Great Britain. But there are other pressing concerns, even in unionist heartlands.
The protocol's big, there's no doubt that, but to me the housing issue is the biggest issue in this area.
I like to see us getting equal equality for both sides.
Yes, yes. And I think the number one factor is the living issue, the electric and the gas.
What they do for my community, they don't do nothing for my community. They only come round their door when they're looking at their phone.
Irish nationalists are poised for a historic victory, but Sinn Féin's Michelle O'Neill can only become First Minister if Unionists form a government with her.
On shot.
Father Martin McGill fears more political stalemate. He rebuked politicians at journalist Lyra McKee's funeral for not coming together sooner.
Why, in God's name, does it take the death of a 29-year-old woman with her whole life in front of her?
The priest says political vacuums are dangerous in Northern Ireland.
I have to say my blood would run cold. I would put it as strongly as that, with the idea of stalemate. Stalemate here has left us in some very, very dark places. So if there's stalemate, that if our politicians refuse to do that, then they provide a ground where the likes of those organised crime gangs will flourish.
In the last Stormont election, the Democratic Unionist Party won 28 seats, Sinn Féin 27, but the DUP is under pressure over Brexit. There are two more moderate parties, the Ulster Unionists and the nationalist SDLP, and Alliance, its middle ground vote steadily increasing. Freya McClements, Northern editor of the Irish Times, says a Sinn Féin win would write a whole new chapter here.
It plays into the question of a border poll, a unity referendum, whether there should be a united Ireland, because that's the conversation that was put really firmly on the agenda by Brexit. That conversation is not going away. And you'll hear the DUP very vocal on this, saying if there's a nationalist First Minister, it brings that border poll closer.
Brexit and the resulting border in the Irish Sea have been political game changers here. One driving nationalist demands for Irish unity, the other fuelling unionist fears about their place in the United Kingdom. And that creates the potential for this to be a defining election. For 100 years, Stormont elections have been won by pro-British parties. Victory for an Irish nationalist party holds out the prospect of real constitutional change. David Blevins, Sky News at Stormont.
Now, overwhelmed by work and endless to-do lists, a group of women got together to get their work lives under control, choosing to focus on what mattered most to their careers. They vowed to say no to new requests for dead-end work, and so the No Club was born. Let's talk about it, should we, in more detail. Lise Vesterlund, Professor of Economics at the University of Pittsburgh and co-author of The No Club, Putting a Stop to Women's Dead-End Work, is with us. Hi, it's great to see you. Thank you for joining us on the programme. Tell us more about the No Club.
So the No Club formed about 12 years ago, where I and three of my friends all realised that we were spending endless hours and trying to sort of knock out to-do lists that really were not core to our jobs. And what we realized was that what was keeping us busy was what we characterized as non-promotable work. That is work that was important to our organizations, but wasn't important to our careers. And in that process, we uncovered that we were not the only women who were suffering from this work. In fact, it turns out that any profession that we looked at had women overburdened with this work. So it didn't matter if you're an architect, an engineer, or an academic, or supermarket clerk. Women everywhere were doing an exceedingly large amount of this work, and an amount of this work that was much larger than their male peers.
And what do you say to women who feel that they can't say no?
That's a very real fear, because what we show in our research is that women are not doing this work because they are better at it or because they enjoy it, but rather because we all expect them to do this work. So saying no can be quite dangerous, because you are at the risk of backlash, because everyone is expecting you to take on this task. So by declining the work, you are in fact sort of violating the norm that everybody holds of you. So part of what we're arguing in the book is that this is not a fix the women problem where we need women to say no more often, but rather it's a question of fixing the institutions that they work in, where we all rely on women to sort of keep the machinery going, but don't reward the work that they do to keep it going.
And what can men do to help?
What men can do to help?
Yes.
They can come forward and help out. One of the things that we talk a lot about is that, that we certainly have seen in our own work, is that we don't seem to recognize that women are carrying this exceedingly large burden. And once we become aware of this problem, we have seen in many organizations that rather than asking for volunteers in a meeting, that we start taking turns, that we draw names out of a hat. So recognizing that whenever it comes not just to the holiday party, but also to assigning that low revenue, time consuming client, that we're sort of inclined to give it to the females, that will make all of us, including the men, aware that we shouldn't just give the work to the women, because what we ideally should be doing in organizations is to give it to the employees who is best at it, not to the one who's least resistant to take it on.
Good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for having me.
Thank you. Turn now to the story that a leaked draft opinion document suggests the Supreme Court is set to overturn a historic law that legalised abortion. Joining us now is Republican strategist Amy Tarkanian and a former Democratic member of the Ohio Senate, Capri Cafaro. Hello to you both. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the programme this morning. Looking at some percentages, a survey saying that just over 40% of Americans said the country would be a worse place to live if the US Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, which, for the benefit of my viewers here, legalised abortion, of course. Amy, to you first of all, why are they wrong?
Well, they're wrong because if this is overturned, it does not take away the actual abortion legality. It takes it back to the states. So each state will be able to make that decision on whether, if they eliminate it actually altogether, which I highly doubt we will see much of that, if at all. It will actually leave it up to the citizens to decide, is it okay to have an abortion in your first trimester, second trimester, third trimester? Where is that fine line that we draw? And so I think the fact that this is a scare tactic that the left is using by trying to divert from the many failures of the Democratic administration leading into the midterms, this is their way of basically dangling a carrot and trying to divert from all the other failures in saying, hey, Republicans, they don't care about you, they don't like you, when it's quite the opposite.
OK, Capri, what do you think of that?
Well, first, let me say a few things. I mean, we have no idea who is behind the leak of this document. It has been apparently authenticated by Chief Justice John Roberts, so there's obviously some truth behind the content of this. I certainly hope, and I know that there's been a lot of concern, at least expressed by conservatives, that this leak is something that is very concerning. We've already heard from the courts that they are going to try to figure out who's done this and adjudicate it. So let's put that to the side for a moment and simply say a few things. One, the fact that the states will actually, if Roe v. Wade is overturned, the states would have the ability to make that decision. They're already doing that, and a number of states across the United States have placed significant limitations on access to abortion rights at this point. So that, I think, at this point will set up the American electorate for some significant concerns about inequity in access to abortion services, concerns about the ability to access contingent upon not only geography, but economy. No question about it, the Democrats have an uphill battle in a midterm election. And I do think that whether or not this is a scare tactic or not, that has been facilitated by Democrats or liberals, I think that what will result from this, if indeed we do see an overturning at the Supreme Court level, we will see, I think, a potential galvanization of a Democratic coalition that would not necessarily show up in a midterm election. There is absolute malaise amongst Democratic voters right now across the United States. Low poll numbers for President Joe Biden. Not a lot of motivation on behalf of Democratic voters. This is an opportunity, I think, and we're already seeing this, for galvanization of a coalition that has traditionally brought Democrats to victory. I still don't think that there is any guarantee that this will help Democrats actually get over the finish line in the midterms, but it will play a significant role in United States Senate races, in places where there are open seats, because the Senate is really the place that makes these decisions about Supreme Court nominees and confirmations.
OK, let me bring Amy back in there. Land of liberty, of course, is how many people see the United States. What do you say to those who say, except when a woman wants to have the liberty to decide what should happen to her own body?
Well, it's going to be, will she have that ability to do it in the first, second, or third trimester? And where do you draw the fine line? And when you hear the argument about...
Sorry to interrupt you there, Amy, because my understanding was, and I'm sure you're going to clarify this for me, it was once a heartbeat had been detected, then an abortion could not be carried out. Is that wrong?
Yes, and then they have actually said it's the viability of the fetus or the child, depending on which you believe. I believe that life starts at conception, and with the way that technology has improved dramatically, we can now actually have a younger child that is not out of the womb yet, to have a higher chance of surviving. We have seen actually babies as young as 21 and 22 weeks survive outside of the womb with assistance. So there are more possibilities now from when this was first put into place in 1973. In 1982, President Joe Biden, then state senator, actually U.S. Senator Joe Biden, even said himself that Roe had gone too far. And so I think that it going back to the states is going to be incredibly important. And I do believe that it is not going to take the Democrats over the finish line, just like Capri had mentioned.
Capri, your thoughts on that?
Well, let me just address the heartbeat issue first, Kay. So this is an issue that has permeated across a number of states. And right now, a number of states have placed, including the state of Ohio, they've passed things called the heartbeat bill, where there would be constraints on access to abortion services at the time in which a heartbeat is detected. So those type of constraints already exist across the state. And I think with the absence of federal protections that have been extended by Supreme Court precedent, what we would see, as I mentioned earlier, is this patchwork, which I think is concerning a number of women, and not just women. I want to go back to that earlier point about the land of liberty. This does set a precedent not only about reproductive rights in the United States, but about a number of other rights that have been extended and protected in recent Supreme Court cases, including, for example, same-sex marriage, and the Obergefell decision that the Supreme Court had passed through in 2015. So I think that there is a lot of concern that is going to be raised about whether or not the United States Supreme Court, can we leave some of these larger issues of protecting rights to the Supreme Court, or will we now see the overturning of Roe versus Wade as a potential open door to unraveling other protections that have been extended to a number of different groups over the last several years and decades? So I think that the issues of freedom, individual choice, privacy, all of those things are now, I think, up for debate and are raising significant concerns. I do think that it will coalesce Democrats, but I do think, and I stand by this, that the question becomes, will it be enough in a very difficult midterm election to actually make a difference? It is right now motivating the current senators to try to find a way to codify reproductive rights in the federal statute, which basically would supersede anything that the court would do. Okay. That's going to be a heavy lift. We'll see if it happens.
Absolutely fascinating stuff, ladies. It's great to hear both sides of the argument. We do appreciate you taking the time to stay up late or get up early. I'm not sure which one it was, to explain your point of view for us on The Breakfast Show here in London this morning. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. We're hearing from the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, of course, speaking right now about EU sanctions on Russia.
The United States announced massive budgetary support, and we, as Team Europe, we have to do our share too. But then, in a second phase, there is the wider reconstruction effort, and you all know that the scale of the destruction is staggering. Hospitals and schools, houses, roads, bridges, railroads, theatres, factories, you just name it. So much has to be rebuilt. Of course, in the fog of war, it is difficult to come up with a precise estimate. But economists are talking about several $100 billion. And here, honourable members, I think Europe has a very special responsibility towards Ukraine. With our support, and of course with the help of the international financial institutions and other global partners, Ukraine can rebuild their country for the next generation. And this is why today I propose to you that we start working on an ambitious recovery package for our Ukrainian friends. If we do it right, this package should bring massive investments to meet the needs and the necessary reforms in parallel. So it should address the existing weaknesses of the Ukrainian economy and lay the foundation for sustainable long-term growth. It could set a system of milestones and targets to make sure that the European money truly delivers to the people of Ukraine and is spent in accordance with European rules. It could help fight corruption. We have to do that. It could align the legal environment with European standards.
Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, speaking in Brussels about a package of measures to harm Russia and benefit Ukraine. And when I say harm Russia, I'm talking about the economy, of course. Now, here's a thought. How much would you pay to get your hands on this, here it comes, legendary piece of football memorabilia? What is it? Well, it's the shirt the Argentina great Diego Maradona wore during the 1986 World Cup quarter-final against England, that famous hand of God, and the goal of the century. It's estimated to fetch more than £4 million at a Sotheby's auction in London. Later on, the late football icon swapped shirts with England midfielder Steve Hodge after full time, and he has been in possession of it ever since. Who wants to buy it? Apparently, there's some Argentinians in town. Stay tuned.